Welcome to the official YouTube channel for the Urban Farmer Podcast. Hit subscribe so you don't miss a single episode. Now let's jump right into it. It's a flashback, The Urban Farmer, as originally recorded 10 years ago with myself and farmer Curtis Stone. Welcome to the Urban Farmer, week 12. It's now June 2nd and the setup phase of the farm is over. Curtis is now full steam ahead with production. Things are busy on the farm and he's reached the point in the season where he's now selling product almost every single day of the week. Big part of those sales goes to restaurants, and a large portion of the product that's going to restaurants is made up of greens. That means for Curtis's farm, greens are big business. When it comes to greens, how much of a percentage of the farm's economic output do they actually represent?
Salad mix alone is a third of the total economic output of my farm. It's probably half if it is greens, with other various greens, spinach and arugula, things like that.
Half of the economic output from Curtis's farm comes from greens. That's pretty remarkable. Let's take a look at that for a moment and think about it. With that much farm output coming from greens, how does Curtis have the space to grow that many greens? Remember, he's only farming a third of an acre. How is that happening? Curtis is stacking his production in time. He's cutting his greens multiple times. He plants the beds out once, and then he cuts and cuts and cuts and cuts.
I've been able to cut some of these beds up to 8 times. So this is again, I'm going for a shorter crop and a lower yield, but I'm getting more cut.
One bed, one planting, and many, many cuts. It's a remarkable strategy that allows you to get a lot of production out of one piece of land. All those cuts, they add up really fast. Here's an example of one bed of red Russian kale that was planted in March and it's still producing exceptionally well for Curtis.
It's a 44-foot bed. And I'm not kidding you, Diego. I've cut this thing about 10 times. This one bed has already generated near $1,000 of income. Like this, I can cut it again. I'm going to cut it again tomorrow. It's crazy.
As you get into urban farming, you become more experienced and you start uncovering gems just like these, greens. And with enough experience, you can start to high grade all of these gems and really focus on the strategies that give you the greatest return. It's going to vary situation by situation. But when you start to do that, that's what makes you more and more efficient. Over the years, Curtis has improved upon a variety of strategies and he's become more efficient and more effective as an urban farmer. Something that has actually benefited his customers because he's recently changed his pricing structure and lowered some of his prices. How is that playing out?
It's not necessarily like blanket price lowering for everything. It's kind of changing pricing structures for some customers that buy large volumes of things. So like I put down the price of my greens, my salad mix a little bit for my restaurant customers because I'm able to produce a lot now, and like I'm producing I think around 200 pounds a week, basically just to incentivize pushing it a little bit more. I don't know if the price will stay that way because the neat thing about prices is that you kind of discover where they should be as you put them out into the marketplace. And as I've done that, I've discovered that, whoa, okay, I'm selling so much volume that there's nothing left over at the end of the week. And I don't think the price had anything to do with it. I kind of feel like, well, why did I lower those prices? I did to incentivize moving more volume. But what I also did this year is I really increased the quality of my salad mix, partly or mostly actually because I've gone to this Salanova lettuce And I've also changed the variety of my arugula and a couple other my mustard greens. And the quality is improved. And so when I look at the overall, it's like, well, I've lowered the price and I'm selling a better quality. So it's kind of like, maybe I don't need to do that. So, prices are dynamic. Prices change based on what the market will bear. So it was an experiment. I'm not so sure I'll stick with it, but sometimes you just have to try things to see if they work or not.
In terms of quality of the salad mix, do you mean in terms of the pricing of the individual components? Like there's better stuff in the mix, or is it lasting longer, or does it look better when you're delivering it? How is the quality perceived by the client?
All of the above. The lettuce is the main part of all of my salad mixes. Well, I do a few different types of salad mixes at different times of the season. At this time of the season, I'm pretty much just into like a lettuce mix, basically. And I add a little bit of, if I have odds and ends of other greens after I've harvested a bunch of stuff, they kind of will just go in with the salad mix. But for the most part, the salad mix is just a green and red lettuce. And it's this Salanova lettuce, and it's an interesting variety because these I grow it as heads with under landscape fabric or over landscape fabric, and they grow very uniform type leaves on the heads, and so you actually cut it, and you get these very, very uniform sized, very crispy and robust and heavy lettuce greens, and they wash well, which is very rare for lettuce. Like in the past 5 years, the previous 5 years, not including this one, I dreaded washing salad mix. I dreaded it because the lettuce just not hold. Once I wash the greens and spin them and then put them on the drying and sorting screen, they immediately bruise. They lose probably 50 or 60% of their shelf life and they just don't look as good. So I usually avoided washing greens at all costs. And sometimes I'd have to wash them, but I really avoided it. But now with this stuff, even if it rains and then I wash it again and then it still holds. So it's got better volume. The weight is there. The shelf life is there, the appearance is there because there's a real uniformity in the size of the leaf, which people like for restaurants. It's just overall better. But the yield is considerably higher. Like I'm pulling at least 30 pounds of leaf lettuce mix off a 25-foot bed, and that would be anywhere between 2 and 4 cuts. I'm getting up to 4 cuts, at least, anywhere between 10 and 20 pounds at a time. So the yield is anywhere between 20 pounds total, like after all those cuts, to 60 pounds. So the yield is incredible. So, part of me is like, well, I might as well pass off that value to the customers. But the interesting thing is that the more I look around at the marketplace and see what other people are charging, not only other farmers, but also what distributors are charging for California produce, the prices are actually higher than what I'm charging. And there's no reason why my product, a local product that's fresh, harvested blocks away from where most of my restaurant customers are, should be cheaper than what the distributors are selling from, Southern California product that only has a shelf life of 3 or 4 days.
Okay, there's a bunch of things I want to dig into there. In terms of lowering the pricing, you said you want to push product more. Do you think if you didn't lower the pricing, the chefs would have gone elsewhere, or did lowering the pricing either one, keep them buying from you, or did it really incentivize them to buy more?
I don't think I would have lost them. I've had a very dedicated customer base for the last 5 seasons. This is my sixth season. And I've had a handful of restaurants that have been with me since the beginning. So I don't think they would have gone somewhere else. It's hard to say. It's a tough question. It's a lot of speculation, really. I've definitely taken on a few new customers this year that have been very high volume customers. Like I have one restaurant that's buying anywhere between 40 to 100 pounds of salad mix a week from me, one customer. So, price going into those original negotiations when I met with these guys up in maybe it was early March or something like that, just when I got back from permaculture voices. Um, it might have been part of it, but the more I interact with them and the more, and the fact that I see how enthusiastic they are about the product, even the kitchen staff, like when I come in, they're like, "Oh, it's the greens guy." Like they just talk about how they love using my product. That's good to hear. And that means that, I don't think I'm off in the price. And I don't think if it went up, it would make much of a difference. Cause I mean, some of these restaurants are charging $15 for a salad, $20 for a salad. So there might only be $1.50 of greens on that salad plate. So it's not really much of a expense.
Do you have any sense in terms of how much better your greens are given that they're local compared to the stuff that they're giving to distributors? I know it's probably obviously better just because it's fresher, but is there an extremely noticeable difference from what you've heard talking to chefs?
Oh yeah, totally. A lot of chefs will tell you, I mean, well, here's the thing. It's possible to get good product that comes from California. It's not like everything that comes from California is just bad. It's just that a lot of it, if it's been on a truck for a number of days and has gone through customs and has been radiated when they put it across the border and all this stuff, it does considerably deteriorate it. Um, but yeah, I mean, I definitely hear the stories all the time because most chefs will tell you if they're buying stuff from the big distributors that on average, they're tossing out like at least 20% of that product every time. So it's just doing a cost benefit analysis. If you're paying $6 a pound, which is cheap for, organic spring mix from California, which isn't the price anymore. Actually, now the price is considerably higher, but that was a kind of a going rate for a number of years. If you're paying $6 a pound and you're throwing 20% of it away, well, that means that you're throwing a fifth of that away. So that means you're actually paying $7.50 a pound. So to pay $1 more to get stuff that you'll never throw away will have better volume on the plate because you can actually use less. Like when the greens are fresh, they have more, they puff up more, and so you can actually use less on the plate. So they're gonna get more value out of the product anyways. And most good chefs understand that anyways.
What are greens going for there? Like, what are you guys selling to these restaurants for? Just a range?
It's like anywhere between 8.50 and $10 a pound, really. Like depends what it is, and it changes, right? It changes based on the scarcity of the product. A green that I've grown this year that was tremendous success has been baby red Russian kale, and it's something that not many other growers are doing. I've been growing it for years. I used to grow it as full size kale, and I realized quickly that that didn't work too well in my marketplace. Then I started direct seeding it, but I was still cutting it a little bit bigger. I was selling it as like bagged kale at the market. And then I started planting it really dense. Like I started seeding it in the same way I would arugula as a baby green. And it's just been unbelievable. Like the stuff grows forever. I still have a bed in my greenhouse that was seeded probably about March 15th. What is it? A 44-foot bed. And I'm not kidding you, Diego. I've cut this thing about 10 times. This one bed has already generated a near $1,000 of income. Like this, I can cut it again. I'm going to cut it again tomorrow. It's crazy. And so some of these greens, it's just like they'll just keep going. And what I've discovered, actually, even more this year, I've really just figured this out this year, opposed to even last year, is if you compromise a little bit less yield for the first, like when you harvest the bed. So say a bed of red Russian kale, a 25-foot bed. The way I used to harvest it, I'd get it a little bit bigger. Maybe the green was about 5 inches long, and I would get about 18 pounds on that bed. I found that if I go down to 8 pounds from that bed to cut it shorter, like considerably shorter, where the green is like 2.5 inches long, beautiful baby crisp green, I get less yield at that one cut, but I can cut it every single week. Like it comes back in 7 days or less. And so it just means that I get more cuts more consistently and the product is better and I can charge a higher price. Because I used to actually have, when I grew it at a little bit larger of a size, I'd charge less for it. But now I charge a premium price for it because it's a beautiful product and nobody else has it. Well, very few other people have it.
So for that first early cut where you don't get as much yield out of it, you're cutting it sooner, meaning closer to when you seeded it, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm cutting it at a shorter date to maturity. Like right now, well, we're kind of getting into rainy season here, but we have been more or less full on summer weather for the last month. I I started this. We talked about it in previous shows, but there's been this new plot that we've been developing. We're actually harvesting off that plot now, and it's funny. I direct seeded a bed of this. I do this Mizuna. It's a mustard green, but they call it a Mizuna called Scarlet Frills, and it's 17 days to harvest. I direct seeded it. 17 days later, cut it, and that's cutting it at that perfect size. Like just it's short, it's it's beautiful, but it's already. I was just there. I cut it on Thursday. I was there today. This is Tuesday, and it's already ready for a second cut. So it's regenerated in 5 days.
It's kind of an interesting concept in and of itself, this whole idea of greens, because they're a huge driving force of your farm. And I don't think people fully realize the power, or maybe they're starting to, because you can cut them so many times. It's not just you seed out a bed of lettuce once, one harvest, and then it's on to the next bed. I know each crop's different. Can you kind of give a rough breakdown of just thinking in your head what greens you grow and about how many cuts you can get out of each different type of green based on your experience, just to reinforce that fact?
Yeah, I've been able to cut some of these beds up to 8 times. So this is again, I'm going for a shorter crop and a lower yield, but I'm getting more cuts. So Red Russian on a 44-foot bed, I'm cutting about average 12 pounds per cut of that bed, and I'm cutting it about 8 times. So selling it for $10 a pound. So the listeners could do the math on that one. Arugula, I can cut. Depends on the season. It's a cooler weather crop in the springtime. This spring I was cutting arugula about 4 or 5 times, but now I'm getting into the warmer season. I might only be able to cut it twice, but I am trying a new like wild arugula, and so I've already seen that I can get more cuts from that. Lettuce, I can cut at least 3 times, 3 good cuts, and then you get a fourth cut that might be a little bit lower of a yield. Mustard greens in the spring, I've been able to get 5 or 6 cuts. Same with tatsoi, which is an Asian green. Mizuna, green Mizuna, same thing. Or maybe a little bit less, maybe 5 cuts. With spinach, I do it in 2 different ways. I do a premium cut, and then I do a secondary cut. So when the first cut of a spinach, I mark it as a baby spinach because it's more of a spoon-shaped leaf. But then when it grows back the second time, it turns to a Savoy-shaped leaf, which is sort of an arrow-shaped leaf. And so it's a different price point. The yield will actually stay the same, but it's not as nice of a product. So the first cut, when it's baby and really beautiful spoon, small shaped leaf, I can sell it at a higher price, and then I get 2 or 3 or 4, sometimes 4 more cuts after that at a lower price. But the intervals are shorter. So to get that first cut might have taken 25 or 30 days if I seeded it in the spring, the early spring. But then after that, I can cut it again pretty much every week or maybe every 10 days if it's really early in the season.
It's amazing how many times you can cut that stuff. When it comes time to determining when to cut, I know you've learned a lot of this from experience, but for somebody starting out, what are the indicators you want to look for in particular crops to know, okay, now is an okay time to cut?
You just look for density. Basically, I don't want to see any dirt. Like I want to see that it's so filled out that all I can see is the crop. And it's basically just when that happens though. Like if it gets too thick, then the product gets too big. That's the one nice thing about the Salanova stuff though, is that it can't get too big. That's why it's very forgiving. I mean, one thing that had been a real challenge for me in the past with lettuce, because I was direct seeding all of my lettuce, is that you have to cut it when it's ready. And if you don't, it gets too big and you're like composting 50 pounds of lettuce, which is, horrible. I mean, not really in the end, it's not horrible. It goes into my compost. It all ends up back in the soil anyways, but it's horrible in the sense economically that I'm putting in labor to harvest this thing and it's not being sold. So it's basically just when I can't see the ground any longer is when I cut. And so, but I'm targeting baby leaves here. So, I'm looking for a leaf that is like from the point of the cut, the stem to the top to be about 2.5 inches, maybe even 2 inches to 2.5 inches. That happens when it's pretty filled out.
I know when I was up there last July, I helped you pull out a whole bed of lettuce that had gone past the point where you didn't want to cut it anymore. So we pulled it out by hand to keep the no-till strategy going there. What was the determining factor there to say, I can't cut this anymore, it's past its time? Because just visually looking at it, somebody who's inexperienced would say, that looks okay.
Yeah, I know it's funny. It's funny because our standards have been lowered by grocery shopping for so many years. I find it's like, I look at it and I'm like, that looks disgusting. It's spotty. It looks malnourished. And that's how it'll look. That's when you can't cut it anymore. Is it just doesn't look vibrant. It starts to lose. It starts to get some discoloration. It it looks really choppy because it's been cut so many times, and so its regrowth doesn't look as beautiful as it did at first. That's one thing that's really nice about this red Russian kale is that you're cutting it at the stem, and every leaf that comes back is like a full-sized, perfectly shaped leaf. Whereas something like spinach, for example, when you harvest it, you're often cutting the new leaves that are growing off the plant in half. And so when they grow to full maturity, they're kind of like they're a full-grown size leaf, but they've got a big cut in front of them, so they don't look as perfectly shaped. Um, so it's kind of just it's a combination of things. It's just if it starts to look malnourished, it just doesn't look, the shape isn't there, the taste isn't there. That definitely happens with lettuce. You know that when you cut it too many times, is that it just starts to get really bitter. I'd say it's those things.
You've talked about doing the starter cut, so you have a smaller leaf, and then you're also talked about giving chefs a greens mix. Have you found that chefs are really particular about what goes into the mix, or has that been something you've learned over time? They don't really care, or they're okay with this stuff?
Most chefs like the fact that the mix changes. Actually, all chefs do. Well, it depends on the chef. Some chefs want to make their own salad and they don't buy greens in the traditional mix. Like they won't buy a spring mix, say. They'll want like the core ingredients and they'll want to do something with it themselves. Um, and that's because they're probably doing something unique with a salad. Like they're doing like a bed of butter lettuce leaves and then they're putting like bacon on it or something. Like they're doing something unique. It's not just a mesclun mix per se. Because if that's what they want, then they'll just get the mesclun mix from me. But no, most of them, like all the chefs that buy my salad mix, they like that it changes, and it changes throughout the season. Like for example, in the early season, I don't have a lot of lettuce ready. Like there's some lettuce, but not quite as much. But the first greens I have available are things like tatsoi, mustard greens, arugula, and red Russian kale. So those four all mixed together for I call a braising mix. And there's various different types of braising mixes. People put baby chard in it or baby beet greens or there's all kinds of things you can do. But that's what I call my braising mix is those four greens: mustard, arugula, red Russian kale, and tatsoi. And then once I start to get some lettuce available, which will be maybe a week or two after I have that stuff, then I'll just throw those four greens in with lettuce, and then that's my spring mix. And then as I get, like now, at this point in the season, I'm producing tons of lettuce. So my spring mix is mostly just lettuce. Got a little bit of red Russian kale in it, a tiny bit of mustard, maybe a little bit of arugula, but it's probably 90% lettuce. And then as I get into the summer, I start to have baby beet greens, and I do a baby chard, and I'll still put red Russian kale in it as well with the lettuce. So that will be kind of a mix in the summer, and then in the fall as it cools down, it'll kind of revert back to what it was in the spring.
And you're doing a mix like that of so many different greens. Does it affect your harvest strategy? Meaning something like red Russian kale, I would think is going to hold up better than lettuce. So you could harvest that first before you harvest the lettuce. Are you having to play those types of games?
Yeah, that's a good question. Totally. And in the past, absolutely, it would hold better. But the lettuce that I'm growing now, the Salanova, has incredible shelf life. So now it doesn't matter. Well, my strategy this year has, like I've even taught this in my workshops for years, is that I do this thing called like a 5-day harvest period, which is really for me more like a 3-day harvest period. But you know, the least perishable type crops at the beginning of the week, and the most perishable type crops at the end of the week as I approach my restaurant deliveries and my farmers market sales. But what I do now actually is I just harvest things when they're ready to get the perfect product. And I'm selling almost every single day of the week now because I have chefs either picking up. I have 2 different distributors I sell to. I'm doing a couple midweek deliveries and pickups to restaurants downtown, and then the ones further away are picking up. And then I do my deliveries on Friday. So I'm harvesting something every single day of the week except Saturdays. So just Monday through Friday, we're harvesting every day. And it's just like when something's ready, harvest it. Because if I can harvest at the right time of day and the right type of weather, then it's better to do it that way than to harvest in the rain or harvest in unfavorable conditions where the shelf life is going to deteriorate faster anyways. So it's just like if conditions are right and the crop looks good, harvest it. And so that's what we've been doing, and it's allowed a lot more freedom to be able to stack other farm tasks that we're doing at the same time. So it's like, okay, I'm going to do some planting at a plot. We do bed prep on Mondays. We do planting on Tuesdays, unless weather is an issue like it has been this week. It was pouring rain all day today, so we weren't able to get our planting in. But so with this whole thing is that it's like, okay, if I'm going to a plot to do some planting and I see a crop is ready, I'll do my planting and I'll harvest that crop before I leave that plot so that I don't have to go back there later in the week. So what if it was 2 or 3 days before the market? If it was the right conditions, like the weather was cool, the crop was dry, like in the case of greens, for example, the product's going to have a better shelf life anyways. It's going to look better. It's going to be more marketable. So it's far more worth it to do it that way and just kind of harvest whenever, opposed to having this kind of stringent schedule. It's like I must harvest Thursdays and Fridays, or Wednesdays, Thursdays and Fridays, or whatever it is. Just harvest when stuff's ready. And things too, like radishes, for example, French breakfast radishes in particular. When they're ready, they're ready. I mean, once you get into hotter weather, you've got 1 or 2 days when they look ready. If you don't harvest them, you can go back the next day and they'll be woody. You have to just harvest things when they're ready as they appear, especially as you get further into the season.
When you harvest them, the greens, do they go straight into the walk-in? And then when you get all of your greens harvested at some point in the week, then do you batch wash everything?
Yeah, pretty much. Like whenever things are harvested, they immediately go into the cooler. Um, except for situations like today, like it was hammering rain all day, and we had no choice. We had to harvest because we had our 2 distributor orders that we do, and we had 3 other early week restaurant orders, and so we had to harvest greens in the rain. It sucks, but it just has to be done. And so, but the nice thing is because this lettuce is a lot more robust, it's not that big of a deal. So in this case, I was harvesting it and then taking it home and putting it in the spinner immediately. And the great thing about we've talked about this in previous shows too, is that I'm using this landscape fabric with holes in it for my lettuce, and it's been fabulous because it's pouring rain. And normally what happens in pouring rain is my greens get really dirty. And lettuce has always been the worst for this just because of the way it grows. It kind of catches dirt in it. And, but this is great because it's pouring rain and the lettuce is perfectly clean because there's no dirt being kicked up from the ground because it's all landscape fabric. So I'm basically harvesting, just dumping it straight into the spinner and then just putting it on the sorting and drying screen and then bagging it right from there. It doesn't have to go in the cooler because it's kind of cool outside anyways. That would be the only time, that would be the only exception to that. Otherwise, whenever something's harvested, we remove the field heat in some way or another. So, sometimes we do that on site because if this is one of the challenges of being a multi-locational farm is that, we might be at a site that's a few blocks away from our main location. We've got a bunch of harvesting to do there. We need to get field heat off a crop right away. And usually when we're at a particular site, like say I'm going to one place and I need to harvest radishes, carrots, and greens there, I'll harvest the carrots first and then I'll put some water in a tote and leave them in the shade. Then I'll harvest my radishes and then I'll sprinkle some water on them and put them in the shade. And then I'll harvest the greens last and then I'll go straight to the cooler and put those in the cooler right away. And then the other stuff will either go in the cooler or get processed or something like that.
When does your greens mix become a mix? If you had multiple types of greens at one plot, would you ever harvest the greens, put them all into the same containers, knowing that they're eventually going to be mixed? Or do you keep each green segregated out in case a chef wants one specific thing, and then you go through the whole washing process of everything separate and then manually mix it all together after everything's washed?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. It's always separate until the end result. So what happens is, say I've got to go and harvest red Russian kale, arugula. I've got spinach to harvest and I got lettuce to harvest, but I've got orders for say I've got 50 pounds of spring mix on order. I've got 20 pounds of red Russian, 30 pounds of arugula, so on and so forth. I'll go and harvest all of those things, but when I'm looking at my spring mix, I don't have spring mix in the field, right? I have lettuce and the spring mix is a combination of many things. I'll basically be looking to harvest lettuce that's equivalent to say 80 to 90% of that spring mix. If I think I'm going to have enough extra greens of the other stuff to make up the difference, to make that full quota for what I need for spring mix. So that's the kind of cool thing about doing salad mixes is that it's forgiving because it's like, if I went out and I harvested and I only got the quota for the other greens that I needed for the individual orders, like I only got enough arugula for what I had on order, I only got enough red Russian kale for what I had on order, so on and so forth, then that week my spring mix would just be lettuce. But if I had more, because I always I harvest entire beds at a time. So if I have 50-foot beds, I plant those beds with the intention of cropping out the entire bed in one shot because I want to have consistency in the crop length. So I don't harvest chunks of beds at a time. I crop out the whole bed. So when I do that, if I have lots of extra other greens that I was an abundance of what was meeting for quotas, then I just throw that in the salad mix and just have more salad mix. Because the salad mix is it's one of my best sellers. Like other things like arugula, if I have arugula on its own, I can always sell that. The demand for arugula is so high. But things like red Russian kale at the farmers market don't sell as well, but they do for restaurants. So it just gives you wiggle room to kind of play with things and okay, just throw it in here and whatever it is to just make up for the difference, or that way I can sell it in a better way. It's like whatever I have extra of, if I can sell it better as a salad mix, well then I'll just throw it in the salad mix.
Once you harvest it, how long can you keep it in a walk-in before it just becomes compost?
That's another good question. Something we get into in the course as well. I wouldn't sell anything that was 4 or 5 days old. It's still fully presentable and it's stuff that I eat. But I want when I sell something to a customer, I want them to be able to get the most amount of shelf life out of it. So, and I hear it all the time. Like, I had many customers come to the market last weekend and say, "I bought your greens 2.5 weeks ago, and they're still good. So that's what I want to hear. And that's the reason. Like, I'm not going to harvest something, I'm not going to sell something that I didn't sell at the last farmer's market at the next one. I'm not going to keep greens for that long. Especially when they've been packaged, they lose their shelf life because when they go into individual packages, there's less air. So greens will hold better if I say the earliest I would harvest greens in some cases where if like I looked at the weather and it was going to be rainy for the week, but it was sunny on Monday, I'd be like, okay, you know what? We're going to harvest greens right now because we're going to be able to avoid the bad weather, meaning we won't have to handle them and wash them and stuff. And so they'll keep longer as a result of that. Whereas if I harvest them in the rain, they're going to have a little bit less shelf life. So, Monday would be the earliest thing. So, harvest it on Monday, sell it on Friday or Saturday. That would be the longest.
So swinging all the way back to the Salanova, that's something new you tried this year, and it sounds like it's been working out really well for a variety of reasons. When it comes to the Salanova, how does that compare in vigor to normal lettuce, and how often can you cut that?
Well, I've actually noticed that it's a little bit longer. It takes a little longer to grow than the lettuce I've done in the past. So there's the one trade-off there. It's longer to grow. I would say 30 to 40% longer, especially for the first cut. Even the cycles in between, actually, because I can't cut one bed and then go back the next week and cut it. Not right now. Maybe in the summer. I mean, I'll have to see. It's still a new thing. But right now, it's almost seeming like it's 2 weeks between cuts, which is long for lettuce. Traditionally, if I'm doing a leaf lettuce direct seeded in the ground at this time of the year, it's June 1st today or June 2nd, I'd be able to cut it every week. So it's longer in that regard, but the yield is higher, the product is nicer, and the hold it has better shelf life. So I think so far it's a good trade-off.
That's awesome. It just amazes me how versatile and how powerful these greens can be as an economic force for a small farm like yours. Do you think this is one crop that if anybody's looking to go into urban farming, greens are likely going to be a big portion of their business? Now, obviously, the type of greens could vary based upon where they're located in the market, but just given how much you can get from greens, do you think that makes sense? Is one of the kind of keystone crops for most urban farmers to try and grow when they're starting out?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I would say greens are a third of the total economic output of my farm. No, they're more than that. So I'd say like salad mix alone is a third of the total economic output of my farm. It's probably half if there's greens, with other various greens, spinach and arugula, things like that. And I'm not counting kale in there because I don't really market kale as a green, though it is a green. It's not a baby green. So yeah, it's critical. It's critical. But I mean, the nice thing about the greens is that you can get many cuts, so you get a lot of yield per square foot. They're ready in a short amount of time, and it's a pretty marketable product because most people like salad. So you've got a pretty wide appeal there. And so yeah, I mean for any farm really. But some farmers don't like growing greens. Like I found that really larger rural farms don't really like growing greens as much. And maybe that's because sometimes they're prone to more pest pressure in those circumstances. I know many organic farmers that will not grow arugula because they have so much flea beetle pressure that it just looks like a shotgun went through it. Like they can't grow it. Same for any type of Asian greens, mustards, tatsoi, even bok choy. They have a hard time growing them. And that's one thing that I have a huge advantage on as an urban farmer is that I can literally run away from pest problems because I can rotate crop families to different types, different plots and get a fresh start there. So I've never had an accumulation of any particular pest build up at any of my plots because that certain crop is never there for very long. Because anytime it does become anytime flea beetle does start to become an annoyance at a particular plot, I'll just stop planting that crop there and plant it somewhere else. And because it's not all in one central place, the pest can't follow the crop around like it could if it was on a 1 acre field. That if you have a flea beetle problem at one end of the field, it's going to find anything else in that field. But in a city, there's all these physical barriers and microclimates that prevent that from happening.
Running away from pest problems are one of the advantages that you have as an urban farmer. When it comes time to growing greens themselves, is there anything you can think of in terms of stuff you really need to focus on that'll help you leverage your success when it comes to greens?
Yeah, density is very important. We talked a little bit about density in the past. If it's not dense enough, then you'll have more weed pressure. If it's too dense, you compromise your yield and the crop doesn't look as good. There's also finding the right time to harvest it. That's also very important. When's the right time to cut it again? Those are the main variables that you have to consider. I'd say density is probably the most important there, is finding the right density. That's a massive subject to get into, but it's something we outline in very much detail in our course. Densities also need to be tweaked a little bit based on where you are in a climate, because soil types, humidity, temperatures can affect your densities. Like, I have some friends out on the East Coast of the United States that say, "Oh, I can't plant at that density. That's crazy. It doesn't work here." So there's always some adjusting that has to be done based on your bioregion.
Makes a lot of sense. I think that's a good place to transition into next week. This week we talked a lot about selling greens to restaurants. Next week I'd actually like to go dive deeper into actually how you get the greens to restaurants and the whole delivery process. So look forward to talking to you again next week. Stay dry with all the rain there.
Cool. Thanks, Diego.
Thanks for watching this episode of The Urban Farmer. Be sure to hit subscribe so you don't miss a single episode.